All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Stephanie Baskerville. I am the content writer here at ProServeIT, and I'm going to be your webinar co-host today. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar entitled Remote Work 104, Top 5 Remote Work Security Tips to Keep in Mind. We've got a lot of great content for you, and it is my privilege to introduce the person who's going to take us through it all. Marc Mendez is one of ProServeIT's amazing solutions architects, specializing in cybersecurity. He's a former Canadian Forces soldier and correctional officer, so Marc's kind of always had a fascination with security, you might say. And he has been in the IT industry for over 20 years, with 7 of those here at ProServeIT. Marc has knowledge in several areas, such as infrastructure, networking, and Office 365, and of course, the aforementioned cybersecurity. So welcome, Marc, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Steph.
No problem. And before we get started here, folks, I just want to point out to you that if you have a question or two throughout this webinar, please feel free to use that questions tab on the GoToWebinar platform. We're going to be keeping things, somewhat informal today, so I'd like to monitor that window throughout Marc's presentation, and I'll be happy to kind of read out those questions as they come in. So please don't be shy. Feel free. You can ask as many questions as you need to. That's what we're here for. So we kind of understand, that the global workforce landscape is changing, quite a bit. I mean, most of you are most likely working from home today, or working remotely. We're being told that that's a good decision and stuff. But of course, this has led to, I would say, a number of security related concerns and issues that people probably didn't take into account prior to all of this pandemic exploding the way it did. And so, we need to kind of start thinking about how to utilize some cybersecurity tips and tricks, I suppose you would have to say, just to keep that in mind and keep that corporate data safe and stuff like that. And that's, of course, where this webinar is going to come in today. We are, trying to help get that conversation started around some of the remote work security tips that you can keep in mind for these unprecedented times. And of course, for that, I think we'll turn things over to Marc to get started with our content. So Marc, the mic is yours, so to speak.
Thanks, Steph. So as Steph alluded to, this is going to be a fairly light presentation, and really the crux of the information that I'm about to show you is just observations that I've seen over the last few weeks as people start moving towards the remote workforce. In particular, the one thing that I do want to bring to your attention is that from an attacker standpoint, these are ideal times. The rationale behind it is anytime there's a disruption. Now, normally that type of disruption would be, for example, a merger or acquisition, or maybe some other form of change to the organization. If an attacker is aware of it, they will take advantage of that. Just because change does lend itself to being able to be a little bit more covert as far as being able to do things, but more importantly, there's a disruption to the norm. So if there is an anomaly, it's not as easily noticed. So from my perspective and what we're seeing right now is, number one, the human factor. The human factor itself is the one thing that is probably your biggest concern, because at the end of the day, 99% of all technology that we're put in place to secure our networks really boils down to ensuring that the human aspect of things is under control. So whether it's identity and access management, whether it's other types of access controls, those type of things are put in place to be able to control that human factor. Today's day and age, we're seeing a definite uptick in social engineering and phishing. So again, because people are working from home, I've actually read a couple of cases where attackers are actually calling up some of these users. One way or another, they found their phone numbers, their cell phone numbers, and they would say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from IT. We've been contracted to help you with XYZ problem as you work from home. All I need is your password, and let me on your computer for a couple of minutes, and we'll get you all set up so that you're ready to go." During these times, it could be reasonable for an attacker or for somebody, an organization, to hire an external entity to be able to help with, the enablement of the remote workforce. So being able to ensure that, number one, under the countermeasure side, that communication is maintained at all times. That if you are using contractors that are not known to the end user community, that they're informed that this is coming down. Education, make sure that your users understand what social engineering is and what phishing is, because truthfully, that will be your weakest attack vector. That's where most people will attack, is on the human aspect of things and not so much on the technology. And actually, you know what? For this next part, I'm going to get Steph to talk about the Safe Computing Best Practices ebook.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So, yeah, folks, like, I mean, it's, we are obviously seeing a lot of not even just the people calling up too, but we're seeing a lot of email phishing attacks and things happening and stuff. And one of the things that we like to say, of course, is that your end users are kind of your first line of defense, right, against those attackers and those hackers and things that are trying to get into your network and trying to get into your for nefarious purposes and things like that. So one of the things that we at ProServeIT put together, of course, was this Safe Computing Best Practices for End Users ebook, which we're going to offer to everybody on the line today. So you'll get a link to download it in our follow-up email, and you'll be able to check it out. But it's really important, as Mark was saying, in terms of education and educating your end users on some of the things that just to be aware of and some of the things just to be cognizant of as we go through these times. I mean, hackers will use any major events to get into your network and to get into your email inbox at least. And so I'm not sure if anybody's actually received the email, but I know that there is an email circulating, supposedly coming from the CDC, that is saying, like, there's, COVID-19 cases in your area, and sign in here and you see what cases are in your area and stuff like that. So there are things to be aware of and wary of during this time, and we just want to make sure that everybody's trying to stay as safe as possible. So that's one of the reasons we put together this ebook, and we will be sending that ebook to everybody to check out. But yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Steph. So the second thing that I see a lot of weak implementations, so identity management. As per the last page, when we're looking at stolen credentials, that comes from, phishing or social engineering. But one of the things that's also happening, because of the rapid requirement to be able to deploy devices out into the field, sometimes the how to manage them after the fact has become an issue. So when we start looking at things like password management and resets, you know, eventually, if you're not using cloud directory services, if you have an on-premise AD, at some point in time, your user is going to have to change their password on that workstation. And how are you going to enable that? If they have the ability to VPN in, that's one thing. But if they get locked out of their machine and you can't establish that VPN session, how do you manage your password resets? And we've actually had a couple of instances recently at ProServeIT where some of our customers have actually run into that exact issue. So that's one thing I'd give some forethought. The One of the things I'm also hearing is that from an IT perspective, the identity management aspect has become very cumbersome. There's a lot of people that are working to manage identities at this point in time, as well as access to their environments. And that has caused IT saturation. So what IT saturation essentially is that they're so busy doing one aspect of their job, um, obviously the uptick in the change in the way that people work, that they're no longer paying attention or reduced attention to what's going on outside of that new aspect. So what I mean by that is that if, for example, if somebody were to normally check event logs to see if something was happening, maybe it's backup failures, maybe it's failed login attempts, the fact that they're so concerned about maintaining operations or introducing new operations to their environment, they're no longer paying attention to what their normal job would be or their normal routine. So it's important that we offload as much of the work to the end user as we can, which one of the things that we're looking at, again, is a password management and reset solution. In other words, self-service password reset, or being able to take whatever you can out of IT's hands and put it into the end user in a safe manner. Now, ways that we can do this, as I mentioned already, is we looked at Cloud Directory services. A Cloud Directory service enables you to be able to not only change passwords remotely, but also allows you to be able to, in some cases, manage devices. So if you need to provision a new user, or if you need to change permissions for a particular user, you're able to do that. Those changes are picked up without the need to be able to have that person actually either physically in the office or having VPN connectivity to the office. And the other thing I can't emphasize enough, and I would say this, it doesn't matter whether it's during these particular times or in the past, but now especially, multi-factor authentication is your best friend. It will be it will be the strongest line of defense that you can implement, bar none, across the board for everything you do. The next thing we need to look at is device management. So again, if actually I'm going to start at the bottom with this one. We're going to look at personal devices, networks, and VPN. Personal devices need to be taken into consideration because now if people are using their home laptops to be able to connect into your environment, especially if they're doing it through VPN, if that machine was being used by a child in the household that decides that they want to click on their click happy and they click on everything, there's a potential that that home PC has a virus, or maybe it doesn't have the latest and greatest Microsoft updates or any type of patch management whatsoever. One of the problems with that is, especially if you're using VPN, is that when they connect to your network, you have now introduced a direct connection into of any potential hostilities that are on that machine into your network. I personally am not a big fan of VPN. I feel that it is a legacy technology. It's been around for a while. In my opinion, it's inefficient. There's an overhead to encapsulation, so you can't get as many sessions running simultaneously as what you could do with other more newer technologies. And the thing I hate the most about VPN is the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that you have essentially extended your network into somebody else's home. And all the warts and all that exist inside of that person's home now have the ability, obviously there's some controls you can place, but in general, they have the ability to now transfer into your environment. And in today's day and age, and with the events that are happening today, it's one of the last things you need. So taking that a little bit further from a patch management and a policy management standpoint, it's always nice to be able to deploy patches as well as to be able to enforce policies on endpoint devices without necessarily having to have that VPN connectivity. The same thing as I mentioned about the directory services issue previously also exists inside of that. The countermeasures to this is you really need an MDM solution. At the end of the day, you need something that is a cloud-based MDM solution that allows you to be able to control not only your handheld devices, but also your Windows workstations, or any workstations for that matter, and to ensure that they are managed appropriately, that you have the latest and greatest patches, and that if you need to define policies, that you're able to do that. The next thing is I would look at published applications and or virtual desktop infrastructure over top of VPN. The published applications, if you're not familiar, essentially you would publish Outlook, Word, you name it, whatever application you so choose. And when a person logs into the website, they have a web-based application window that pops up, and all it is that application. They can work, they can do their job, but there's no open network. In other words, they don't have the ability to transfer information from their machine into your network. It's a view-only environment. And the same with VDI if you want to give them a full desktop experience. Now, in both cases, you do have the ability to extend file transfer to the local machine if you so choose, but that can be controlled by policy. So effectively, what you are doing is you are protecting your core infrastructure from an environment that you do not have control over. Intellectual property management.
Gotcha. Mark,
Yeah.
sorry, just before that, we had a question from Ryan. Are there any recommendations around device management, like any product recommendations for patch management or anything like that?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Yeah, absolutely. Here at ProServe, obviously we're a Microsoft solutions provider. We tend to look at Intune as our MDM solution. Intune provides a complete feature set, whether it's from a mobile device standpoint or a handheld device. You're able to push applications, you're able to do patch management. From a Windows 10 perspective, you can do Windows update rings, you can do Office updates, you can push any Win32 based application. I should say almost any, I'm sure there's some gremlin out there. So if you have custom applications, you can package those, distribute it to workstations, the whole 9 yards. It's a much more secure cloud-first approach to being able to manage the environment. And in conjunction with Azure Active Directory, you have the ability to be able to ensure that the appropriate personnel are using the appropriate machines. Are there any other questions, Steph?
Not at this time, no. I'm just monitoring. Right. Folks, if you do have questions, please use that questions tab and we'll get them answered for you.
Perfect, thank you. So the next thing is intellectual property management. I mean, truthfully, at the end of the day, the threat is IP being stored on non-corporate solutions or IP leakage. That is a huge concern right at this point in time as people try to find ways to be able to work from home, especially those who have never done it before. So it's not uncommon to see somebody spinning up a Dropbox application so that they can put whatever work they want inside of that environment. That is a huge concern because once your documentation is left to your control or any information that you have, effectively you have IP leakage. Unless you have the appropriate controls in place, that your IP can be distributed across the internet, either intentionally or or based on accident, and it can be a real nightmare. So for this particular piece, the countermeasures really are that if you have a corporate-based cloud solution for document management, in our case, whether it's OneDrive or SharePoint, it's imperative that everybody knows that what it is and that they begin to use it and continue to use it, and that you put controls in place so that if there is potential for them to use a product that's not sanctioned by your organization, that it is prevented, that the data is prevented from going to that particular location. In addition to that, document encryption is a very important component. Inside of the Microsoft stack, there is the ability to be able to have document encryption extend to personal devices or even documents that are no longer in somebody's physical control. Effectively, what happens in a nutshell is when a document is open, it calls out to your Azure Active Directory to see if the person has the right credentials to open it. If they do not, that document will not be decrypted. So it really extends your IP protection beyond your borders. The other thing also is you should start mandating and enforcing data classifications. And what I mean by that is know the sensitivity of the documentation that you're dealing with. This is going to help you when you start introducing things like, for example, data loss prevention policies, as well as one-up document encryption. By enforcing those classifications, at least you have an idea as to whether the effort for certain documents to be managed as far as where they're stored is as important as other documents. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the classifications are an important point moving forward. And as I mentioned, introduce things like data loss prevention. DLP is a great product for ensuring that information does not leave your organization from a cloud-based perspective. One of the things that it can do is it can look at, for example, social insurance numbers, credit card data, or if you've got data classifications, as I mentioned earlier, you can enact certain policies where only certain groups can access that information. Maybe it's read-only for everybody, or maybe in addition to that, it will prevent the document or even an email from leaving your organization that contains certain types of sensitive data. And this to me is probably the most important thing. Everybody is right now living in a live DR environment. Your BCP plans should be dusted off, and you should be working diligently to know what's working and what's not. So my recommendations more than anything else now is, number one, you need to start creating policies, because if you've got a mobile workforce and they haven't been working from home in the past, they don't know what's acceptable as far as a remote worker policy, or whether or not you should be using only corporate devices to be able to access your data. These policies are imperative at this point in time to provide guidance to your end users. Configuration changes. I've been in IT for a long time, and one of the things I've hated the most is creating runbooks or change logs to your environments. Effectively, at this moment in time, because of the rapid state of change that so many of us are now going under, every configuration change you make to your environment, you need to document it. You have to, because when this is said and done and there's been 500 changes and somebody doesn't know why something is happening, at least you can go through that change log to see what was done. If there's anything when the smoke clears that may have introduced security holes into your environment, and I promise you there will be, that change log will be golden for you to be able to review. The other thing also is your business continuity plans. Many organizations don't have any, but right now you're living it. Document, document, document. Understand where the impact is hitting you. Because the truth is that although I had never planned to have a global pandemic, it's quite frequently that organizations, whether through it's a cybersecurity threat or a natural disaster threat, will need to enact a business continuity plan. Start documenting and plan for it. Start putting one together now. Like I said, this is a live event. You're seeing where your pains are. 3 months from now, if, God willing, everybody's back to work and things are back to normal, which I'm not sure, but people have short memories. We'll forget. Document it now. And finally, know what's working, what's not. Have you deployed machines? And as I alluded to earlier, is your VPN saturated? Is there concerns around Wi-Fi access, stability, video conferencing, you name it, communication, that type of thing? Write down all the goods and all the bads, because as you go back to the policies and documenting your business continuity strategies, and even in some cases the configuration changes, this is a golden way. This is an opportunity that nobody wants, but it is from a positive side. You're not doing any dry runs. You're doing this in a live environment because you have to. Document it and know what is working, what is not. And on that happy note, I'll pass it back over to Steph.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, that I think you provided some really good food for thought today on sort of how to address that security piece and keeping ourselves secure while we're working remotely and stuff. And I really enjoyed listening to those tips. I know personally, I'm having some issues with my Wi-Fi myself, so being able to document that and being like, yep, Wi-Fi, right. We need to figure out that a bit more, but that's okay. Anyway. A couple next steps here. As we mentioned, in our previous webinars, if you've been on any of our other remote work webinar series, the first step that we're kind of recommending people take at this time is to do that 5-minute remote work readiness assessment. This is something to, it's about 10 questions. You answer them to the best of your ability, hit submit, and then our team will review the responses as they come in, and then we'll be able to actually provide some recommendations on how we think that you can improve your remote work readiness. So if that's something that you're struggling with right now, or that's something that you're not really sure about, definitely check that assessment out, and we of course will send the link out with our follow-up email to everybody, so you'll get the link. You can just do it very quickly, and it's something to kind of help you keep in mind, or maybe help you start building that one of those continuity plans that Mark was talking about, or things like that. So it's a good first step to take for sure. The other thing that we're also saying, as I mentioned before too, and Mark, if you want to advance the slide too, I mean, it's a slide, it's there, but there is that ebook that we have talked about. It is another way to kind of get the conversation going about cybersecurity in your organizations, and I think it is really important to to have the end users in your organization understand, what's out there today, and what are some tips and tricks and ways that they can kind of help keep themselves secure, especially we actually had a question come up, Mark, about social engineering, which I know is actually, it's kind of a topic of interest of mine, but the book, the ebook, and I'll get to that question in a second, but the ebook itself kind of talks about a lot of this stuff. So of course, like I said, we are offering that to everybody on the call today. You can take a look at it. We're going to send the link through, and it's just a read through, and maybe keep yourselves aware of some of the things that we would recommend that you try or implement in your own life and stuff like that. The question that we had, Mark, which you or I'm sure could both answer this. We had, what are your thoughts on the games that she's, this was from Heather, sorry. What are your thoughts on the games that I see on Facebook and social media that asks us to find our quarantine names based on birth month or day or color shirt you're wearing or things like that? Do you want to answer that?
Actually, why don't you give it a shot? I know
I'll
this is
give
a
it a
passion
shot.
of yours. I know this is a passion.
You know what
of
it
yours.
is? It is really interesting. It's so interesting to see how much data we are willing to give away. And these Heather, these games that we see, the find your quarantine name, or the earliest one that I can remember is the what's your soap opera name, and it was like the first street you ever lived on, and your middle name, right, which of course are two massive pieces of personally identifiable information, which a lot of us probably use as like those response questions to banking apps and things like that, and like security and stuff. So what I would say is, it's always kind of, you always kind of have to look at things, I think, with a grain of salt these days. You have to kind of take it into account, like, how are people using this information? And if, it might not be very much that I'm giving away my birth month, but that is 1/3 of your birth date, which of course can be used for a lot of different things out there. So, and this day and age, with technology being what it is, it's very easy for people to be able to mine data off of your social channels and your social media channels and things like that, mining that, just going, creating a program that will go through your entire Facebook feed and only pick out certain key pieces of information like that you may not want to. So it is something that actually is addressed in the ebook as well, just to be cognizant and be aware of how much data you're giving away. And I would say that the quarantine games and the things that you're seeing on social media these days, they're not always as innocent as they appear. That's what I would say. Mark, is there anything to add to that, or did I cover that okay?
No, that was fantastic stuff. That's exactly it.
Awesome. So folks, I do want to open the floor for questions. And we've got a comment here from Mark saying, not a question, but this was an excellent session. So thanks very much, Mark. We're really glad that you enjoyed it. But folks, there are questions, this is your chance. I mean, we've got plenty of time left to open the floor. Use that questions tab, and we'll get those questions answered, about security or anything that we can help you with, So we'll keep the line open for a little bit, and just see if there's any questions that kind of come in. I think that, maybe what we can do, Mark, is we can talk about a little bit about sort of some of the next steps that you would recommend, in terms of like, what are the, we've given them 5 tips, but maybe what's the most important tip to focus on, and maybe what's the most relevant to be addressing first.
So, from an implementation standpoint, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, most organizations are right now still struggling to be able to actually introduce productivity into their environments. Once that's done, from a security perspective, it really depends. I'm going to look at it from a financial, because I see more organizations than not bringing in the revenue that they once did, and now they've got capital expenditures that were not planned for. Number one, documentation. That is one thing that it doesn't cost anything from outside of a time perspective, but it's imperative that that's done. Number two, multi-factor authentication. MFA is going to ward off a lot of identity compromises and will help keep your environment secure. Number three, I would look at remote access. Again, I have a personal hatred for VPNs. They're kind of in my opinion, a dark ages technology, but that's my opinion. And after that, device management. There's going to come a point in time in the very near future where you're going to need to push an application, or you're going to need to change a policy setting or something on somebody's machine. And do you have the capability to do that today without a struggle? And that's important. A cloud-first approach with everything. Right now, anybody who is living the traditional infrastructure life is suffering a lot more than anybody who's adopted a cloud-first approach. And as I see it, any future environmental bugs, pandemics, you name it, anything that comes along in the future, if you don't learn about the pains that you experience today, you're going to repeat them again in the future, and next time it may not be as forgiving. So that would be my approach at this point, from a high level. Now, obviously each company is different, but from a high level, that's how I'd approach things.
Awesome. All right. Well, we don't have very many questions coming in here. Trent, yes, the webinar will be available. We are recording this session, so we will make the recording available to everybody who's on the line, and those who couldn't make it on the line today. You'll be able to actually, see a recording of this at your convenience. Other than that, I'm not really seeing a lot of questions come through, and I'm caught, I mean, we can leave the line open for a couple more minutes to just see if there's anybody else that has a question, but otherwise maybe we'll just give you guys a little bit of time back in your day, and we can call it. If you did have any other questions though that you were thinking about, or something that you wanted to kind of just ask us, please feel free. You can reach out to us, cloud@proserveit.com. It's our email address. Mark and the team here, we can address any questions that you do have, and address any questions that will be coming in. Yeah, I'm thinking that we'll just we'll end it here, Mark, maybe, and just call it a day. I am going to say, though, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us and for sharing your wisdom with us about this topic. And thanks to everybody on the line, for joining us for this webinar as well. At ProServeIT, of course, we know these are quite trying times for a lot of companies out there, for almost every company out there, and we are here to help however we can. So, feel free to reach out, cloud@proserveit.com. We are here if you need us, and we are definitely, available to assist you in any way that we can. Also, we are doing a couple more webinars over the next coming weeks. So, please stay tuned to your emails for other content that we will be sharing with you, and other webinars that we will be doing as well. So you can take a look at those and see if you'd like to sign up for those as well. But yeah, other than that, I'm going to say hopefully enjoy the rest of your day, folks, and stay safe out there for sure. And we will talk to you all soon. So cheers.